Hey, Sip&Talkers, welcome back.
Yeah.
You know how we do it. Grab your drink, get comfy, and let's get into it. And you guys, today's topic, it's one of those things that you're just like, wait, hold up, what?
It really makes you think. We're talking about holding a whole country accountable, and not just any country. We're talking about on a global scale. It's not exactly a simple thing.
No, not at all. Especially when that country is, well, China. Things get a little complicated.
Just a little.
Yeah. But, you know, one of our listeners reached out. They want to know more about all these attempts to try and hold China accountable for the whole COVID-19 pandemic mess.
Yeah, for all the craziness we went through. I mean, it's a good question, right? Lawsuits, compensation, everything. It all gets so messy. We're here to, well, untangle it all for you.
Exactly. So we've got a bunch of articles here, legal stuff, news reports, all kinds of different opinions on how to even approach this. So what we're going to do today is figure out, like, what's actually possible. Can you sue a country? What are the challenges? What could even happen?
And the thing is, there are no easy answers. International law is, well, tricky. There's no one who can just go into Beijing and be like, all right, give us justice.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
So let's start with something a little more concrete. Remember that case in Mississippi where they won a $24 billion judgment against China? That was back on March 9th.
Oh, yeah, that one got everyone's attention. I mean, $24 billion, that's a lot of money.
Right. I was like, hold on. Can a state even sue a whole country and actually win?
Well, they did win, that's the thing. But here's where it gets interesting and maybe a little frustrating. Getting that money from China, well, that's a whole different story. It's like winning a bet with somebody who just refuses to pay up, you know?
Oh, I know exactly the kind of person you're talking about. Like, I never agreed to that. But seriously, though, can China just ignore a court ruling like it's nothing? It feels kind of, I don't know, shameless.
You're right. That's exactly the word for it. In international relations, it's actually called the shameless strategy. Basically, a country just says, you know what? We're not going to follow the rules because we're powerful enough to get away with it.
It's like that kid in school who always got away with everything because their mom was the principal or something. But this time, it's like their mom owns like half the school supplies in the whole country.
Exactly. And China knows that other countries really depend on them for all sorts of things. I mean, they're a major player in the world, so they have that leverage.
So even though Mississippi won this huge case, they're probably never going to see that money.
It'll be tough, to say the least. And a lot of it comes down to this thing called the FSIA, the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act. It's basically this U.S. law that says you can't just sue another country for any random reason.
So it's like a get-out-of-jail-free card, but for countries.
Yeah, you could think of it like that. It's based on this whole idea of sovereign immunity, like each country gets to be in charge of its own turf. But there are some exceptions. Like in this Mississippi case, they argued that what China did fell under this commercial activities exception.
Okay, explain that to me like I'm 5. What do they even mean, commercial activities?
Okay, so imagine China is like this giant company, right? And at the very beginning of the pandemic, you know, when everybody was freaking out about masks and gloves, they went around and bought everything up, leaving everybody else without anything. That's kind of what they said China did.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah.
But obviously China doesn't agree with that. And they're not really known for backing down.
Right. Their response to the ruling was pretty much like, yeah, we don't recognize this. It's invalid.
So what happens now? Mississippi's just out of luck.
Not necessarily. Their plan is to try and seize Chinese assets. You know, things in Mississippi to try to, well, get that money.
Seize assets? Like what, their bank accounts?
Yeah.
Their fancy cars?
Well, they could try that. But they're actually looking at seizing farmland.
Wait, farmland? In Mississippi?
Yep. Apparently there are a bunch of Chinese companies that own land in the state.
Wow, I had no idea. So they're basically saying, if you won't pay, we're taking your farm.
It's definitely a bold move, that's for sure. And it could be risky, but it just goes to show how hard it is to actually enforce a judgment against a powerful country like China.
It's like international chess, but with like really, really high stakes.
Exactly. And this is just one case, you know. There are tons of other attempts to hold China accountable happening all over the world.
So even if Mississippi manages to pull this whole farm thing off, it doesn't really solve anything for the rest of the world, right? There's got to be more to it than that.
You got it. The Mississippi case is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle, and it brings up all sorts of questions about other strategies, things like sanctions, diplomacy, you know, even using the media to put pressure on them. We'll have to dive into those next.
So we know that suing China is like, I don't know, trying to herd cats. But what about other ways to hold them accountable? The world can't just be like, oh, well, that sucks. Too bad.
Yeah, you're right. That Mississippi case really shows how hard it is to actually use the legal system. So if lawsuits aren't going to work, what else can we do? Well, that's when things get even more interesting.
All right, lay it on me. What are people saying?
One thing that comes up a lot is economic sanctions.
Sanctions, like taking away their toys or something.
Kinda, but on a way bigger scale. Like you limit how much you trade with them, stop investing in their stuff, things like that. You try to hit them where it hurts their wallets.
Ooh, that sounds kind of harsh, but I guess sometimes you got to be tough, right? Do sanctions even work?
Sometimes, but it can be a little bit like, using a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. You might do more damage than you meant to.
What do you mean?
Well, sanctions often end up hurting the regular people more than the government. And sometimes they can even hurt the country that's doing the sanctioning, too. It's a tough balancing act.
So sanctions are risky. What about the whole diplomatic pressure thing? Can't the world just be like, hey, China, no more hanging out with you until you get your act together?
People have definitely tried that, but it's hard. You need everyone to agree and work together. And that doesn't always happen. Everyone's got their own things going on,
Oh, tell me about it. Like that one time I tried to get all my friends to boycott this one coffee shop because they spelled my name wrong on the cup. Let's just say it didn't really work out.
Exactly. It's hard to get everyone on the same page. And China's been working really hard for years to be friends with lots of countries, especially those that aren't as wealthy. So trying to isolate them, not so easy.
Okay, so sanctions are tough. Diplomacy's a long shot. What about just, like, publicly shaming them? Can't we just put China in timeout and hope they feel bad enough to change?
That's where the media comes in. Shining a light on what they're doing, showing how their actions hurt people, keeping the pressure on them to be more open and honest that can make a difference.
It's like calling out that one friend who always forgets their wallet when it's time to split the bill.
Exactly. Nobody wants to be the bad guy, right? Especially not in front of the whole world. And if people start thinking badly of a country, that can hurt them financially too. Investors get nervous. People might stop buying their stuff. It's a powerful thing.
Interesting. So we've got lawsuits, but those are iffy. Economic sanctions, which are risky. Diplomacy, which is, well, complicated. And then there's the whole let's make them feel bad approach. It's like a four-pronged attack. But doesn't all this kind of fall apart if we can't even agree on where the virus came from in the first place?
Ah, yes. The million-dollar question.
Wait,
where did this all begin?
Totally. I mean, first it was the wet market, then it was the lab leak theory. Everyone was choosing sides based on what they already thought about China, So have we figured it out yet? Where did it come from?
Well, some of the U.S. agencies, like the FBI and the Department of Energy, they think it probably came from a lab.
Really? So a lab leak?
Yeah, that's what they're leaning towards. But other agencies, like the CIA, they still think it was probably just, natural transmission. So even the U.S. government can't agree.
So we're basically playing Clue, but with way higher stakes.
It's a good comparison. And without clear evidence, it's almost impossible to make a strong argument for any one action.
It's so frustrating. It feels like we're just stuck. No clear answers, no easy way out. What are we supposed to do? Just wait and see what happens?
Well, one thing I've noticed in the articles we've read is that maybe focusing on blaming China isn't the best way to go about this. Maybe preventing this from happening again should be the main goal.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the point of playing the blame game if we don't actually learn anything from it, right? But preventing another pandemic, that sounds like a huge task. How do we even start?
It's definitely a big challenge, no doubt. But many experts say the key is cooperation. Global cooperation.
Cooperation with China. After all this back and forth and finger pointing.
Yes, even with China. It's about realizing that this affects everyone. We're all in this together, facing the same threat, and we need to work together to find solutions. Think about it. After World War II, the world came together and created things like the United Nations and the World Health Organization. They were trying to stop future wars and improve health for everyone. Maybe we need something like that for pandemics.
That's a good point. So instead of trying to punish China, we should be working with them to make sure this never happens again.
Exactly. It's not just about holding someone accountable. It's about taking responsibility, global responsibility.
Wow, that's actually pretty deep. You've definitely given me a lot to think about. All right, Sip and Talkers, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll wrap things up with some final thoughts and takeaways. Don't go anywhere. Okay, Sip and Talkers, we are back. And I got to say, my brain is, officially full. We have covered so much stuff today, from lawsuits and sanctions to well, the whole mystery of where this virus even came from in the first place. So let's try and, I don't know, break it down. Figure out what it all means, right?
I think the main takeaway here is that holding China accountable, it's not an easy thing. There's no simple solution. It's really a multifaceted challenge.
Yeah, no kidding. Every path we looked at, it's like full of roadblocks and detours. So let's recap. Legal action, like that case in Mississippi, but it doesn't sound like they're actually going to get that money, right? That's, I don't know, as likely as me winning the lottery.
Yeah, the Mississippi case really shows how hard it would be to, enforce something like that, even if you win the lawsuit. And then there's that FSIA, that Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, that basically gives countries protection from being sued.
Right, that whole sovereign immunity thing, like a diplomatic force field or something.
Exactly. And even if you could get past that, you'd still need really strong evidence. And like we said, we still don't know for sure where the virus came from.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle, but half the pieces are missing. So what about this other option? Sanctions, diplomacy, the media. Any of those seem like they'd work better.
Well, they all have their pros and cons. Sanctions can work sometimes, but they can backfire and end up hurting regular people or even the country that's using them.
It's like, I don't know, trying to kill a fly with a hammer. Yeah, you might get the fly, but you're going to break some other stuff too.
That's a good way to put it. And diplomacy. Well, it can be slow, and you need everybody to agree, which, as you said before, is like herding cats.
Oh, don't even get me started on cats. But what about the media?
Yeah.
That seems like it could work.
Yeah, it definitely can. Shining a spotlight on stuff, keeping things in the public eye, that can put pressure on people in power. But will it actually make a country like China change what it's doing? It's hard to say.
So it sounds like we've got all these options, but none of them are perfect. It's honestly a little discouraging.
I get it. It can be tough when something this big happens and there aren't any easy answers. But I think there are still things we can do, and maybe even some reasons to be hopeful.
Okay, I'm listening. Tell me something good.
Well, like we were talking about, maybe focusing on blaming China isn't the best way to go. Maybe what's more important is figuring out how to prevent this from happening again.
Right, that whole global responsibility thing. But how do we actually do that?
It takes a real change in how we think about things. We have to stop thinking about countries just looking out for themselves and start thinking about working together on a global level.
So, like, realizing that a virus doesn't care about borders or politics, right?
Exactly. Pandemics are a global problem. It's like, imagine your neighbor's house is on fire. Do you stand there and blame them? No, you help put it out because you know it could spread to your house too.
That's a great point. We got to be better neighbors, even on a, global scale.
I think so. It's about sharing information, having good systems in place to track diseases, and coming up with better plans for how to deal with a pandemic if one happens, and doing it together.
So instead of fighting and pointing fingers, we need to build a global fire brigade or something, a team that's ready to jump in and fight the next pandemic.
Yeah, I like that analogy. It's about realizing that we're all in this together. Everyone is vulnerable, and we all need to work to protect each other.
Well said. I like that. All right, Sip and Talkers, that does it for our deep dive into all this whole mess of trying to hold China accountable for COVID-19.
We've talked about the challenges, some things that could maybe work, and how important it is to shift our focus, maybe from blaming to preventing. Hopefully it's giving you all something to think about.
Definitely. And hey, if all this talk about pandemics and global stuff has you feeling kind of stressed, I have just the thing. My buddy Micky has this YouTube channel. He used to do travel videos, but now it's pretty much all music all the time.
Oh, yeah. I've heard some of his stuff. Really good.
Right. He plays like a million different instruments. It's amazing. It's the perfect thing to listen to after a deep dive into some of the heavier stuff.
Sounds like exactly what I need.
I know, right? So go check it out, give his music a listen, and let us know what you think. And as always, thank you for joining us here at Sip and Talk, where we break down the big stuff, try to figure out the world one sip at a time. Cheers.